While we don't know ourselves in our own world if he exists, within the world of ULTRAKILL, God does exist and was the creator of everything. But in order to create things, he needed a fuel source, essentially. Something to fuel living beings. And so he planted the tree of life. From the tree of life came a nectar, and the nectar served as fuel. The said fuel was blood. Blood fuels and powers every living being ever made. As far as we're aware, the only being that may not be fueled by blood is God, seeing as he's the one that created the fuel source. But blood fueled everything. The angels that were worthy enough to go into heaven, the humans on earth, the animals that they ate and farmed, everything was fueled by blood. Within heaven, which is the home of God and for the people that believe in him, he went ahead and created a system where the virtuousness of a soul would determine how the angel of said soul would appear in heaven. Those who were not so virtuous would come out as abstract shapes, but for those that were very virtuous, they would by all means resemble a human or a humanoid being. And God also, obviously, created man. And he looked down from heaven at man itself, and felt regret. Not all of them believed in him. Not all of them worshipped him. Not all of them did what he wanted humanity to do. They went against what he wanted. God began to look at free will as a flaw. And so, to punish people that did not worship him or pray to him, he created hell. While it's never explicitly mentioned who was the first person to fall into hell, it's heavily hinted that Lucifer was the first one to fall into hell. Hell itself was not a location, but a large cosmic scale organism. It was essentially a creature that was divided into sections of sorts, and each section would punish people for very specific sins. But upon casting Lucifer into hell, an angel talked to God and asked, "Why would you create hell? Is eternal torment a bit much for people who just simply don't believe in you?" God questioned this, and regret slowly filled him. He attempted to unmake hell, but due to it being an organism on such a large scale, he couldn't. He wasn't able to get rid of hell. He began to realize just how horrible of a punishment this was. People who fail to follow his exact rules, his exact values, if they don't follow these list of rules, they will now be banished to eternal torment. And it began to make him ponder if he should have even made hell in the first place. But there was something going on Earth with humans. And this said event caused God to snap. Just as a heads up, the humanity in ULTRAKILL is extremely technologically advanced, far beyond even our own current time. So keep that in mind as I explain things. Now, something to mention about the World War I that we see in ULTRAKILL is that presumably every country on Earth was fighting each other, not just the select few of our own World War I. Also, I'm adding this in post because I forgot to mention it. So anyway, back on topic. World War I. A very bloody battle, and in my opinion, compared to World War II, I feel like no one ever talks about it. It was a very, very horrid battle, and there was lots of death, disease, and unless you were a civilian, you were more or less fucked. But in the world of ULTRAKILL, Russia decided to create something that would end up basically making trench warfare obsolete. It's not known how they discovered this, why they invented this, but they decided to create a machine fueled by blood. And this machine, by all means, served as a robot. Russia decided a fitting name for this machine would be the Gutter Man. However, they couldn't find a way to get the fuel source to stay fresh. And dry blood didn't work because it's dry. They needed fresh blood to run. And although Russia publicly stated that it was willingful people who were willingly doing it, in reality, deserters, prisoners of war, and enemy soldiers were kidnapped and sealed inside of a coffin-like shaped contraption on the Gutterman's back, in order to prevent them from flat out just dying, or their blood turning bad, or them being drained of all their blood. The people who were hooked into the Gutterman's back were given minimal, and I mean minimal, life support. Enough to keep them breathing, unfortunately, and also enough to feel the pain of having your blood drained. Upon being put into the machine, the lid of the coffin-like device was sealed shut, and then the person, along with the guttermen, was sent out to war. It devastated trench warfare, and people in the trenches were just eviscerated almost instantly. It was either get minced by its powerful fists or get mowed down by a gunfire. It was by all means an unstoppable force. You couldn't stop a gunnerman once it was dropped into your trench. The armies across the world were terrified and tried to figure out, how do we fight back? What do we do to stop these things? Because once they're dropped in a trench, your army is gone. So Germany decided to fight fire with fire, and created what can be argued to be a Gutterman version 2, the Gutter Tank. Or as I personally like to call it, just like what it says on its arm, the Tank Fist. Compared to the Guttermen, they were even more unstoppable. Their fists could destroy tanks and walls. They could leave behind landmines that could devastate people who find them. They could shoot rockets and seemingly freeze them in place to shoot whoever was nearby. And judging by the radio sounds they make, it appears that these things can communicate. Not like people communicating through radios. The machines themselves communicate with each other. They didn't need someone to tell them what to do. They could follow their own orders. At this point, humanity realized, what's the point of sending a human to fight these things? If you send a human to fight these, they're gone. And so the second phase of what has now been named the Final War started. And it's called the Final War for a good reason, but we'll get into that. The war from this point onwards was just simply who could build the better machine. Every machine built from now on was built to counter the last. With the exception of the final machine, I'm not going to state what that is yet, we don't really know what countries made what. Although we won't know what machine was meant to counter what, I'm going to go ahead and just throw a few assumptions. I think that the Sentry was designed to counter either the gutter tanks from afar, or was meant to counter another enemy named the Mind Flayer. The Mind Flayer, although whatever its original purpose may have been, might have been similar to what it is in the game, being an aerial unit designed to counter ground units. So perhaps to avoid the gutter tank and guttermen's reach, it was in the sky. And then the Sentry was built to possibly counter that. That is about the most we know of machines that were involved in the war. Other machines were built after the war, or were built for a separate purpose after the war as well. But this back and forth of, aha, I have built a machine to counter you. No, I have built a machine to counter you. No, I have built a machine to counter you, went on and on for 200 years. But the final machine of the war was built by Japan, named the Earth Movers. These machines were colossal in size, bigger than any skyscraper you have ever seen. Due to their sheer size, they were not only fueled on blood, but solar energy as well. It's presumed the fleshy interior that we see within the Earth Mover is where its blood came from. As to how this is made, we still don't know. But combined with both solar fuel and blood, it had the power to destroy cities. With this harpoon-like appendage on it, it could fling energy at cities so powerful, the cities were turned to rubble and ash. There was no longer a place you could call home at this point, because before you knew it, your home was going to be ash. And to counter this, people began to live on top of the Earth Movers, building cities and towns and homes. Now you're probably wondering, if an Earth Mover could probably get destroyed by another Earth Mover, why would people live on it? That's the thing though, Earth Movers can't destroy other Earth Movers. Within the Earth Movers, powered by what seems to be both organic and metal-like tools, is a shield generator. And this shield generator can withstand the blast of another Earth Mover, which means it can't be destroyed. Although sadly, due to the war's stop and never was put into full production, a machine was built to counter the Earth Movers. Yeah, they built something to counter this. Named V1, this machine was fast, nimble, but unfortunately could be fairly weak. But to make up for its weakness, had a unique ability. It could absorb blood from pure contact. Its armor had some type of mechanism in it that allowed it to absorb the blood of whoever it killed, allowing it to heal very quickly, where other machines would have to stop, refuel, and then go again. Because of its movement and speed, it could get inside of an Earth mover, deactivate its shield, and allow it to be destroyed. But unfortunately, it never went into full production because the war was nearing its end. It got to the point where so many cities were destroyed. So much of Earth had been ruined, the soil was ruined, the crops were gone, homes were now ash and rubble, that the sun could no longer be seen by all of the smoke. It was the long night, as it was called, where for a long period of time, the sun just didn't shine on Earth. It was so devastated by the Earth movers. And since they run on solar fuel along with blood, and now everyone's living on Earth movers, they slowly began to power down. And unbeknownst to humans, although heavily hinted with the gutter tank, machines could feel. They can have emotion. They can get mad. They can have desires. According to a book that we can read within 7-4, which may or may not be just a machine hallucination for all we know, or something else that I might explain later. Anyway, it mentions that in the last moments of the Earth movers' lives, presumably with their harpoon-like appendage, would reach out for God, but would find no answer. They were aware of their death. There was no final words for their grave, for there was no grave for a machine. But the Earth movers themselves had turned Earth into a graveyard, not only for humanity, but for the plants and soil of it as well. And finally, humanity just stopped. They stopped the war, and they got off their Earth movers and looked around. Earth is a wasteland now. It's beyond recognition. They've destroyed their own home. The final remnants of humanity came together and agreed that this has been a war without reason. There's no reason for them to fight. There's nothing left to fight for. They all agreed that, for now on, machines should aid in humanity in the things that they do, and that war should never, ever happen again. And this war, that to us in our world is World War I, to them is the final, and truly the final war. This war didn't end with a bang. It didn't end with a giant nuke. It didn't end with one grand final battle. It ended in a painful whimper. Humanity began a new era, known as New Peace. New machines were built during this time to help counteract the things that had been going on. Firstly, and their main thing they should be focusing on right now, is the climate catastrophe, as it was named. As mentioned earlier, Earth movers now caused the sun to no longer shine. So to purify the air, street cleaners were invented to purify trash, debris, the air, and help clean the Earth. Since there was very little of humanity left and every human was needed to rebuild, they built drones to serve as security guards and essentially the law enforcement, if you will. In order to make them quickly, they were made cheaply and have the intelligence of a bird. And this can honestly be looked at by these chirping noises that they make. Now, even though New Peace was essentially agreed on by all of humanity that, war should never happen again, there was still that slight worry of violence breaking out again. So a machine that was a more or less improvement of V1 was built. V2, an upgrade to V1. I know, it might be hard to tell. While they scrapped the blood-regaining abilities of V1, V2 could, however, have much more durable armor and was much stronger physically. They were essentially a police officer of sort and were pretty much meant to enforce peace. But New Peace was going so great, they didn't even need it. Humanity was truly at peace with itself. Can't say that about the real world, can we? Although it's not explicitly stated when or where humanity did this, humanity decided to dig into the Earth's core, probably to find materials to help them rebuild the now barren Earth. But while digging, they found a gateway. A gateway to hell. Most likely due to humanity having drained all of its resources, humanity decided to go ahead and extract minerals and materials from hell itself. The strange magma-like liquid that we see may or may not be hell energy, or perhaps it's simply just magma now used to perhaps fuel resources. Although repurposed for meat and blood, the grinders and fans that we see were meant to chop up materials. Humanity also managed to find these strange red doors. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you, I myself get a little lost here, so I'm gonna do my best to explain the terminals and how the red gateways work. The red gateways seemingly allowed you to teleport and were used in Hell to travel to the different sections. Since this is in the mouth of Hell, these are located near it. Presumably combining the teleportation of the red gateways and the terminals, humanity used the terminals to turn physical objects into data that the terminals would collect through the red gateways. This said data would then be collected by another terminal and converted into physical matter, meaning they could essentially send physical items as data and then convert it into what the original object was. The original object itself, however, is sadly lost. Humanity only ever did this with one thing because transferring data into a physical thing took so long. They did it with a small vinyl record for the song "Oh Were You Foolin'" by Russ Morgan. They threw it into the red gateway, and next thing they knew, the terminals started playing the music. However, they only played the instrumental part. But some engineers that worked on the terminals stated that when no recording equipment was nearby, you could actually hear the vocals. And the employees joked that the terminals were shy to sing. However, they were unaware that the terminals were actually sentient. Although we don't see any fleshy bits on them, perhaps being near a gateway that maybe has hell energy, or for a reason we'll never know, the terminals are sentient, just like the robots. And just like the robots, they can feel. And humanity eventually realized that terminals mostly feel one particular emotion: boredom. They sit in a room, collecting data, doing nothing. The terminals have nothing to do but just talk to each other about data that they find. And humanity kept exploring and trying to enter Hell. They would send street cleaners and drones. They tried finding a purpose for sentries, but sadly couldn't think of any, and sent them into Hell, although they weren't able to go very far due to the hostility of the demons and tortured souls within it. But we'll get into those things in a minute. But eventually, researchers found out something about Hell. They noticed machine parts went missing. They started seeing those said machine parts seemingly Frankensteined onto the husks and tortured souls of Hell. The doors would lock at random, even though the technology powering the doors is fine. The doors would make a strange noise every time it happened too. And then humanity realized that Hell isn't a location. It's a living organism. A panicked message was sent, but Hell corrupted its final parts, stating that it's hungry and wants more. Humanity realized it's consuming the mining facility. The mining facility is Hell's next meal. Tortured souls and workers were eventually thrown into the bits and machines of the building. What were once fans and crushers to crush minerals now crushed people and meat. Or once flowed excess rock, now flowed blood. Humanity realized they had to shut this down. And so they did, putting a wooden barricade and warning sign. Yeah, that's one way to stop someone. They shut down the Hell expedition and swore never to go back. And after this, we don't know exactly what caused this. But sometime after the Hell expeditions went extinct, humanity did as well. There is some possible theories. Maybe all of them are right, maybe all of them are wrong. We don't know yet. But some current popular theories is that either A, the machines with their, remember they have sentience, got thirsty for blood and killed all that was left of humanity. B, Hell consumed not only the mining facility, but Earth itself, and killed humanity in the process. Or C, humanity, due to the war and just how much of a heavy impact it had to have on them, possibly just died out from low numbers and went extinct. Although there is some evidence to contradict a few of these, such as ferrymen and the Wrath Layers stating that there was a great wave of souls that fell into the Wrath Layer, turning it into an ocean. However, this could have just been simply war causing it to flood. But something happened, and humanity was gone. The machines were still sentient, and still thirsty for blood. And then the machines realized, well, there's an entrance to Hell within Earth's core. Why don't we just go there? And not only that, but the terminals realized they could possibly get some entertainment out of this. You gotta remember, terminals are sentient, and they just sit there and do nothing forever. And so, upon realizing that machines were entering hell to get fuel, they saw a chance to gather new data, to learn new things, and to talk about new things, and to possibly have things to watch. In return for the machines letting the terminals watch and rate the performance of how the machines killed the denizens of hell, the terminals would grant them points, in quotations. The higher that the terminals ranked their performance in killing the denizens of hell, the more points that they got. They'd give them bonuses if they didn't get touched at all. They'd give them bonuses if maybe they didn't kill anything. They'd give them bonuses if they did it really quickly, or killed everything that they could. With these points, they would then let the machines go up to them, and using the same technology of turning data into physical matter, would upgrade their weapons, such as allowing a pistol to shoot coins, and then you could shoot said coins to just instantly ricochet right at something. They would allow machines to upgrade rocket launchers to shoot cannonballs. They would upgrade what were once just simple generators that were handheld that now were repurposed by machines for a weapon to shoot explosives, or a screwdriver to let them get a constant source of fresh blood. So while the machines were venturing into hell, the terminals were extremely excited by this. Another thing they did for their own entertainment was, upon gathering enough data about certain creatures and denizens and other robots, would create a simulation nicknamed the Cybergrind for machines to practice their combat in. So every time you hear those cheers and boos in the Cybergrind, those are the terminals cheering and booing for you. This simulation allowed machines to practice their combat and not suffer any actual physical damage. However, let's go back and take a look at heaven, because things in heaven are not good. Maybe it was a mix of the war and the death. Maybe it was seeing humanity create their own species of living, breathing organisms just like God did, and he looked at it and got in fear that humanity has done what he's done. Created species that most likely had flaws. Maybe it was just hell being sentient. Maybe it was the fact that hell itself was taking inspiration from the war. We'll get into that later. But something happened to God, and he just finally snapped. And he disappeared. It's never been explained if he's dead, missing, somewhere else. He's simply just gone, and no longer in heaven right now. The lowest rank of angel, virtue, are hell wardens. They serve to make sure that the sinners of hell do their punishment, and that they don't try to do anything else or start a rebellion. But because God's dead, all of heaven needs to come together and figure out, what do we do now that our creator and our leader is gone? So all of the virtues that were once hell wardens also had to go leave, and thus hell had no enforcement. We'll get into the consequences of that later. But during this period, heaven got into a discussion and realized that they need a leader. So they created the Holy Council, a group of probably the most highest prestiged angels, now serving as the leader for heaven. For the Holy Council, an archangel named Gabriel served as a loyal and royal knight under their rule. He earned his rank by power and efficiency, and would do anything the council asked of him in a heartbeat. And although he worked for the council, he was very much beloved by the angels, who praised him for his kind personality and the fact that he still followed under the Father's rules, despite the fact the Father's no longer there. And after this, council sent the virtues back to heaven, and everything was mostly fine. And I've been holding it off for long enough. Now that we've talked about the war of humanity, how heaven responded to it, let's look at hell, the thing that God created that he could not unmake. What did it do, and how did it punish its sinners? As stated before in the beginning of this video, the full game isn't out, so I'm going to tell you, as far as we're aware as of recording, the punishments from layer 1 up to 7. There's in total 9 layers, but 8 and 9 have not come out as of recording. The first layer is Limbo. This is for people who were not bad enough to necessarily, rot in hell, but for people that were not also Christian enough and believed in God enough. This layer is less of physical pain and more mental. The paradise around you is meant to simulate what heaven would have looked like if they had gotten into it, obviously fake though. The trees are plastic, the bird noises come from speakers, and the walls and sky around you are just holographic screens. It's essentially just a bunch of mental anguish that you were not a believer enough, but you weren't bad enough to necessarily suffer. However, if you wish to, you could go to the entrance that leads to lust, which is hell proper. So limbo is more or less a struggle of, do I sit in eternal boredom, or do I venture into hell, and while in agony, not suffer boredom? If you decide to go to lust, you will be greeted with ungodly winds. Lust is for people who put sex over important things and sexual desires. Their eternal punishment is to forever be blown around by the wind, never being able to rest because of the wind. And in there was the judge of hell, King Minos. Okay, I'm gonna do a bit of a history lesson. I'll leave a thing, chapter, whatever, if you want to skip. In the Greek mythology story, King Minos was the son of Zeus. In a story in Greek mythology, he prayed to Poseidon one day, and Poseidon, in a way to thank him, gave him a bull. Poseidon asked that Minos at one point sacrifice the bull, but he refused. Poseidon decided to punish Minos for not doing what he asked, so Poseidon made Minos' wife, Pasiphae, become in love with the bull. She was so in love with the bull that she asked that Daedalus made a contraption that allowed her to become impregnated by the bull. Greek mythology is one hell of a thing. She became pregnant with this bull and gave birth to the Minotaur. Minos was so disgusted at the creature that he threw it in a labyrinth and would have to sacrifice people every now and then to keep it fed. Minos also lost one of his 3 kids to the Minotaur. Him sacrificing people every now and then is what landed him his seat in hell. Hi, hello, I don't blame you if you skipped that little history lesson. Minos, after his death in Greek mythology, within the ULTRAKILL lore, became the judge of hell. Here he would decide what layer each sinner would go to. And although I don't think a lot of people look at it, I honestly view what Minos is doing as a punishment for his sins. Because, I mean, this is kind of a punishment, having to, for all eternity, lead people to the layers they need to go to. However, back when heaven had to rebuild itself since God disappeared, he wasn't enforced by the angels to send people to hell. Plus, presuming the time period, humanity went extinct, and thus he didn't have to be a judge anymore because there's no humans to judge. Minos himself, although he was never able to express it due to heaven, keeping an eye on him, he thought that lust wasn't a sin. He thought that lust was simply just love at its most extreme form. So him and any sinner that was physically able to began to reconstruct lust, turning it into now a utopia of sorts. And the rebuilding of heaven must have taken a very long time because what they've built is extreme. They were able to build force fields around cities that prevented the very, very strong winds from hurting them. They built subways and underground tunnels. They built places to treat water so they could drink clean water. Their technology is almost futuristic, what they were able to build. And it seemed like lust had now just become a sort of discount heaven. Upon heaven finally being reconstructed, they looked back at lust and saw this, and were angered. If you were a lustful person, you were no longer punished, you were rewarded. And they did not like this at all. They sent Gabriel down to kill Minos. Minos was struck down by Gabriel, and his husk now roams and towers over lust. Something I'll mention here briefly, but go into more detail about, the more you are known, if you are a sinner, then your husk will be a larger size. Filth were people that were never really known or popular, and Minos, seeing as he's the judge of hell, everybody sees him if they go to hell, he was well known. So his husk is titanic in size. His husk was wrapped in extremely large and long razor wire, and is now forced to trample and stomp all over the utopia he built. Lust went from a place that was just a wasteland with wind, to a utopia, to now a wasteland with wind, with the occasional bunker to hide, at least until Minos finds you. Now that Minos is, essentially a zombie, Gabriel took the throne of the Judge of Hell. Now he was the one that dictated what layer you go to. After this is gluttony. For those who are gluttonous, not only food, but expensive things. If you were a gluttonous person, your punishment is to forever sit in dissolving acid and writhe in pain within the fleshy walls of gluttony. A lot of the walls and floors, if you look closely, have people in them. Also, a common misconception is that the gluttony layer is actually Minos' stomach. It's not. It's a separate layer of hell, and I think Akita just put the door in Minos' mouth because it looked cool. I mean, not everything has a lore purpose for existing, trust me. I don't think we can fit the mysterious druid into the lore. Gluttony of itself is a very dull layer. Not much goes on here. You simply just sit in acid or sit in the walls in pain. It's a very simple punishment, but also painful. The next layer is greed. Your punishment, if you were a greedy person, is to push a boulder up a pyramid for eternity. Once you reach the top, it will fall back down, and you are forced to repeat this for eternity. If you don't, presumably virtues will blast you. Also, if you decide to not push up the pyramid for some reason, the sands of greed are scorching hot. As in, you step on the sand, your skin will burn. And just like lust, this layer has a bit of a story to it. And it's from another character that's popular in Greek mythology, Sisyphus. I'm going to go ahead and real quick explain his story because it's not very long compared to Minos's, so I don't even think you need to skip it if you really want to. Sisyphus was a very greedy and tyrannical man. He was very cruel to his kingdom and was able to cheat death over 2 times. He did this by tricking Zeus, or probably in the ULTRAKILL lore, God, and his angels. God was angered by this, and his punishment is the same one as in greed. Pushing a boulder up a pyramid, but once you reach the top, it goes back down. He was simply just one of the many people that served this punishment. But while heaven was rebuilding itself, he gathered all of the intelligent Husks of the layer and told them that when heaven comes back, they should rebel and fight for freedom. And so, eventually, their rebel turned into a giant war. A war of grand scales, according to the terminals. Gabriel stepped in to stop it, but also struggled a bit just because of how chaotic the war was. Gabriel noted, though, that the Husks that were fighting for Sisyphus seemingly got their morale and thus a kind of mental boost from Sisyphus. So Gabriel snuck up on Sisyphus and beheaded him. The fighters' morales began to lower, and so their combat skills began to fall as well. The angels eventually were able to stop them, and thus greed went back to normal. Now these sinners not only have the punishment of pushing a boulder up a pyramid forever, but the mental anguish of knowing that they were really close to freedom. After this comes wrath, which were for those who were angry to themselves, their neighbors, and others. Notice I didn't say violent, simply just angry. Violence against people is for its own type of punishment. The people in wrath must forever sit in lakes, or in the case of ULTRAKILL, an ocean of people. Yeah, those hands and bodies you see in the water are people that are suffering. You essentially have one of 2 options in wrath. Either you can, 1, try to fight to the surface and probably get beaten very badly and eventually probably get pulled back down, or just drown for eternity. Within this layer lies the ferrymen. Although never seen in other layers doing this, they apparently take people between the different layers. And as a matter of fact, those skull keys that you see are actually the skulls of dead ferrymen. They're powers that they have powering doors, which, let me explain those powers. Ferrymen, lore-wise, were Husks that were able to impress the Holy Council, and the Holy Council has now given them the mission of touring people around Hell, stating that if they eventually do this for long enough, they'll be let into heaven. Almost all of the ferrymen were people who were Christian, but due to their anger, could not be allowed into heaven. Out of anger and spite against themselves for letting their anger let them not live in eternal paradise, ferrymen canonically tear off their skin in order to hide their face and probably mold and ripped apart bodies. The Holy Council has granted them a holy cloth. They wear it over their head, and its holy powers turn their bones into a blue-like color. Hey y'all, future me here. I'll be cutting in whenever necessary. Back when I recorded this, the dev stream for layers 5 through 7 hadn't come out yet, and in that Hakita basically explains that not all ferrymen are blue, it's just whatever the holy power does to their bones. And the only reason that all of them are blue is so you can recognize them in battle. According to a ferryman's diary, Wrath was once just a very large river. Ferrymen would use ferry boats and their paddle to sail across it. But presumably, from the war going on with humanity, a great flood occurred. Another possible reason for this flood could be the extinction of humanity, seeing as it states that multiple people enter Wrath all at once, which would maybe hint that humanity just died all at once because of hell. And in said diary, Gabriel comes down to save the ferryman. And speaking of the ferryman and Gabriel's relationship, unlike the Holy Council, Gabriel actually sees the good in the ferrymen. He sees that they want to help heaven and that they should be let into heaven because of this. But the Holy Council more or less just sees them as something to just push people around through hell. Maybe hinting that the Holy Council doesn't even care about their actions. In order to honor Gabriel, they built idols, which are statues of Mary holding baby Jesus. Due to the holy cloth that the ferrymen used while carving them, the energy of the holy cloth rubbed off onto the idols. The holy power gave them intelligence and essentially made them into a demon, but with so little hell mass in it, basically none, that it can't move, it can't do anything. But because of the holy power that was rubbed off onto it, it can now, I guess you could say, bless people with its powers. Ferrymen will use the idol's blessings to make sure they can't receive any physical injury during their transportation of souls through hell. But since humanity's gone, there's no one left to transport between layers. Ferrymen now sit, waiting for the council, who want nothing to do with them, waiting for their prayers to be answered. After this is heresy, and much like gluttony, due to its short length and lack of seeing what's inside of it, we don't really know what goes on within this layer fully. But it's essentially believed that if you are a heretic and spreaded the false word of God, you are punished by being in an eternal burning city. The windows that you see on buildings are lit bright red from the flames within. The people in this layer are forever being forced to just sit in eternal burning. And finally, after this, comes the most recent layer, as of now, violence, which is actually unique in that it's divided into sub-layers. Each layer is essentially its own type of thing. With a possible exception of the first area, it's assumed that violence isn't just for pure violence against things, but for specific types of violence, that being against your neighbor, yourself, or God, or nature and art, which God created, so against God. While it's not stated, it's presumed that this first area of violence is essentially just the entrance, and that you yourself are either going to drag yourself or be dragged into the further layers. For those thrown into this place known as the Garden of Forking Paths, mannequins are what you will become. Despite basically following the rules of what a demon is, flesh inside of a stone exterior, these are actually sinners, much like the husks of hell. For those who get caught by presumably unknown forces, you will have your joints ripped apart and then shoved into a mannequin. You then serve as the fuel for the mannequin and give it sentience. Your sentience. And you can no longer control your own body. The most you can do is breathe weakly. With the war going on Earth, Hell decided to take notes and look at the guttermen, and their whole contraption of having a person be unwillingly shoved to power a source. The sinner's joints are shoved into the mannequins unwillingly to power the mannequin shell. Within this layer also lies a creature that I should have mentioned in Lust, the Minotaur. Not the one from Greek mythology, but let me explain. Back when Minos still ruled over Hell, a currently unknown character made a demon in his name. It was actually the first ever demon of Hell. Some theorize it may have just been Hell itself creating its first demon and giving it to Minos. Minos saw this hideous creature and probably remembering what happened in the Greek mythology part of his story, with his son dying to the Minotaur and him having to sacrifice people and that essentially booking him his spot in Hell, he was disgusted by it and banished it into violence. But much like machines, these things, the demons, have sentience. Due to its age, it's starting to fall apart and actually getting close to dying because of how old it is. It's been wandering this maze since it fell in here, and its last goal is just to see the sun one more time. After this part of violence, we enter the next, and I guess you'd say first, subtype. Violence against your neighbor. The original punishment of this layer was to sit in a lake or ocean of burning blood, forever being burnt, and presumably every time you tried to escape, demons would send you back in. And at first, people just sat in there. But because of the war and the extinction of humanity, and because of the war involving violence against others, which is what this layer is meant to punish, the once lake became filled with billions and billions of corpses. Yeah, that's not ground you're standing on. That is corpses. And while in this layer, an odd sight is seen. Earth movers are within this layer. This right here kind of sort of adds some evidence to that theory that Hell consumed Earth, because how else would these things get down there? The gateway to Hell is a little bit bigger than the twin Cerberus bosses. There's no way that thing could get down there. So what was once just a layer of suffering and burning lakes of acid has now been repurposed into a forever lasting war zone. And something else to note is that the Earth movers are functioning. They're alive and running. Presumably hell is giving them fuel. Perhaps they're absorbing all the blood from the blood lakes. Perhaps hell energy is now powering them, but they're powered now. This layer, whatever its original form was, is completely unrecognizable. It has went from a burning lake of blood to just a war zone that lasts forever, which is honestly a cruel case of irony. People who were in the war and thus were violent to others now must sit in an eternal war. The next layer is for those who did violence against themselves, which is the second sub-layer. In the Bible, killing yourself is essentially considered of getting rid of the gift that God has given you. You're wasting God's gift, and thus that's a sin. So killing yourself is essentially wasting God's gifts. And you doing this lands you a spot as a sentient tree, forever sitting still with the cold winds just forever hitting you. And that's your punishment. And something we see here is that these trees can seemingly be fueled, allowing life to perhaps be given to these trees. And within the start of the level, written in Greek, is a saying about how basically if man tries to find death, death will run from man. And these puppets, if you didn't notice, all resemble the Husks. Even the mannequin forms are technically originally sinners of this layer. This leads to a very popular theory that perhaps every time you kill a Husk, they're reconstructed down here, meaning they can never die, meaning in hell, there is no true escape from death. As to what it means with the trees being powered by the blood, I myself do not know. And after this is the final area of both the game so far and of violence, which is violence against God or nature and art. Originally, this layer served as a punishment of an eternal wasteland that was scorching hot, with fire falling from the sky, lighting the sands on fire. And although never stated, within Dante's Inferno, this layer of hell, if they stopped moving, would be stuck in that position for decades. But upon arriving, all those people are gone, presumably having been wiped out by the Earth Movers. The Earth Movers themselves, along with the machines and warfare, have turned violence from a place with specific sub-layers with specific punishments into just one large, infinite war zone. And assuming sinners aren't turned into puppets when they die, these machines may or may not be giving these sinners their freedom. The freedom to stop existing in hell. So let's go ahead and take a look at the different species. I'll try to speed run what the different enemies are, so this section isn't very long. Within ULTRAKILL, there is 3 main categories for enemies that we fight, being Husks, demons, and machines. Some other categories are angels, but there's only really one angel-based enemy, prime souls, and other. Husks are the tormented souls of sinners within hell. The sinner's body is formed based on how well they were known and how recognizable they were. Filth are the lowest rank. They are very, very barely known by anyone and are, quote, not worthy of a full body. Strays are a rank above them. They were a little bit more known, but are still pretty dumb and weak. They do, however, show self-preservation and will run away from you. Schisms are a rare event that occurs when 2 souls that are in the same location try to become a Husk. They then become this amalgamation, and presumably their bones or something creates this opening in their arm that allows them to shoot almost like a rapid fire of hell energy. Soldiers are presumably modified strays given machine parts that hell took from Earth. The machine parts themselves help them use their hell energy in a more effective way. They are a little bit smarter, more intelligent, and try to attack you in a bit more of a tactical way compared to just smacking you or biting you. Now we're at the first Husk that's actually based on its layer and not the way it was formed. Strays are the sinners of greed. What was once boulders that they would carry up the pyramids has now been turned into weaponized sand bombs by hell itself. Their bodies have been doing this sin and punishment for so long that if you look, they've now physically evolved to carry the bombs in a way that makes it easier for them to do it. If you look, their arms and feet are backwards, which presumably help them carry the bricks and now sand bombs up the pyramids easier. Sisyphus insurrectionists are also Husks that were naturally in greed. If the name didn't give it away, these were once members of Sisyphus's army who fought with him during the Great Battle in Greed. After their defeat, heaven cut off what was deemed unnecessary for them to continue their punishment, being a head and another arm, leaving them with one arm, their feet, and that's it. They're essentially given the bare minimum to execute their punishment. They have to carry a boulder with not both of their hands, but simply just one, obviously making it much harder. Can't see where the fuck they're going because they have no head. And yeah, they're in a very, very horrid state, and also basically have to suffer mental torture knowing that they got really close to freedom, but unfortunately lost. Ferrymen, even though I mentioned them earlier, but presuming you skipped here, I'll give you a whole rundown again. Ferrymen are the souls of Christians who are in wrath. They had faith in God, but unfortunately, their anger prevented them from entering paradise. They were given the task by presumably both the Father and the Council, depending on the time era, of escorting the sinners through the different layers of hell. Even though we only see them in wrath, I presume they most likely lead different sinners to red doors that send them to their proper layer. That's what I kind of assume. But then why would Minos exist? I don't know. It's a Dante Inferno reference, okay? Now, canonically, all ferrymen, out of anger, tear off their skin in shame. In order to probably both hide this and make sure that they can complete their task and not get beaten by a filth, they are given a holy cloth which gives them holy energy. This not only hides their fucking presumably gruesomely distorted and disfigured face, but also grants them powers. And with this, it also changes the color of their bones. Although we only see them in blue, Hikita himself has stated they're only blue for the sake of gameplay purposes and being able to see them just in the middle of a battle. Canonically, it just changes to whatever color the holy cloth decides, pretty much. Now, per fairy, there can only be one ferryman. And this is what I find unique is, within violence, for example, death is treated as such a horrid thing that can't happen. But ferrymen battle to the death to own their boats. Presumably, I guess you could say their punishment is just no longer existing, which in hell is more or less a blessing. Or perhaps they're simply just thrown into the sullen ocean, and probably are not able to really get too far seeing as their bones. But every time a ferryman kills another ferryman, they also gain the knowledge that that said ferryman had. So, let's say, I don't know, we had a guy who was in the Civil War. I figure that probably canonically happened in ULTRAKILL, at least I think. And then you have a guy who's invented a rocket launcher but never could figure out how to get it to properly work. I think the guy who has an understanding of explosive weapons will probably understand more than the guy that used a fucking musket. And so the guy who knows how to make explosives thus gains the knowledge of the guy who was in the Civil War, and now he is on top of the ferry, and that motherfucker's dead. Now, even though they're doing a task that God and the Council were very thankful for, it's presumably hinted that at least the Council doesn't really care about what they're doing. Gabriel himself actually understands that they're putting hard work in and are most likely worthy of going into paradise for all the work they've done. However, mankind's dead. There's no souls left to bring to the different layers. And so ferrymen now just sit on their boats and ferries, just sitting in eternal boredom, wondering if they're ever going to be let into paradise. This game gets a little depressing sometimes, I'm not gonna lie. Next up is the corpse of King Minos, and I'm gonna explain a bit how Husks and souls work, because a lot of people, including myself, get kind of confused about how big were Minos and Sisyphus prior to death. So basically, you enter the afterlife as a soul, and then, depending on if you go to heaven or hell, you become an angel or a husk. It is stated that when the prime bosses died, their souls, being so strong and didn't require a husk, began to form. And here's how I think it works. I might be wrong, and for all I know, this is obvious, but I know I myself struggled with this, so I know there's probably other people who have as well. The soul within them was so powerful and well known that it no longer needed the husk to live. So once they got rid of the husk, the soul began to just form its own body, being a prime soul. Which, we'll get into those later. So Minos, and the boss name, the corpse of King Minos was that large when he was the judge of hell, and Sisyphus's husk was that large when he was the king of greed. I mean, hell, if Minos' crown is actually that big, and his beard is that big, then we can just assume that painting was so detailed, because if you just look up in lust, you can see Minos' face. This also explains how Sisyphus gathered such a biblically large army, and how Minos reconstructed lust into this utopia so fast. They were such a large husk, they could do it quickly. The corpse of King Minos itself is powered by parasites. Minos himself is trapped in a prison out in gluttony. I can't fucking talk. The parasites themselves, I kind of think are demons. I mean, they kind of share the resemblance of stone and flesh. Now, Sisyphus' husk is, kind of beheaded, so we don't have to fight that. Thank God. He's already fucking scary as a prime soul. I don't want to know what it was like fighting him as a husk. After this is what is essentially the wildlife of hell. Although we don't really know how they're made, demons are made of stone and flesh, and are sentient creatures, and, like I said, are the wildlife of hell. The flesh within demons itself is called hellmass. It's not known how hellmass is poured into the shells. For all we know, it just naturally occurs, but that's how they're made. Stone, hellmass, and then life is made with it. Presumably, with the hellmass containing blood, it powers the shells. The most common demon is the malicious face, and I don't blame you if you think these guys just float in the air. But as a matter of fact, they actually have hard-to-see spider legs. Not really too much to note about them. They're the most common type of demon encountered in hell, and are pretty hostile. Cerberus, although not the three-headed dog, are essentially guardians of hell. Presumably, they are guardians because they sit dormant with a constantly glowing hell energy orb, which requires a lot of focus and energy to make it constantly be glowing and within your hand. Which, means that they're constantly strong and holding a very strong piece of hell energy to scare off people. Although we can presume it was probably hell, many of them litter Prelude, presumably hell putting them there to perhaps scare off the humans trying to dig into hell. And here's something interesting, is that they show emotion. If you kill a Cerberus near other Cerberuses, then they will get enraged and angry at you. Also, the proper term for a plural of Cerberus is Cerbi. That's a random fact if you didn't know it. Next up is Hideous Masses, which got a very big glow up recently in the latest update. According to their data, they are the result of excessive hell mass being poured into a shell, the flesh now poking out and being very, very easy to see. Their armor itself is very heavily shaped with faces, and on the very top is what appears to be a sort of bear or animal head. Also, a fun fact is if you look at its arms, carved into it is the painting, or a depiction of the painting, The Creation of Adam. The painting itself depicting God and Adam trying to touch hands. The next demon out of this is idols, and they are canonically a mistake. Basically, back when the Great Flood of Wrath occurred, presumably multiple ferrymen, judging by how many we see, were rescued by Gabriel. In order to honor him for rescuing them, they decided to build statues of Mary holding baby Jesus, in order to kind of represent Gabriel protecting them and saving them. However, their holy cloth, which we already know can give off energy seeing as it changes the color of their bones, rubbed off onto the idol, making it have a sentience. Because of it now having sentience and holy powers, it tries to protect anybody nearby, and by doing this, makes them basically invulnerable. The ferrymen themselves probably using this holy energy in order to keep them safe from the waters and flooding of wrath. Although made to honor Gabriel and pretty much God and the council, if the council were to see this, they would have been upset and angered that it was ever created and probably banished said ferrymen to the rivers. Or, my bad, the ocean. Next up is the Leviathan, and this one kind of gives us the most insight into the possibility of what Hellmass is. It says in its terminal, instead of being made of Hellmass, it was made of the corpses and bodies of the Solent inside of the ocean of Wrath, that is. This might mean that Hellmass is simply just physical meat with blood, and it gives soul to the demons. As to how it gets in there and how they're made, oh fucking no. But anyway, the Leviathan is the creation of so many Solent at the bottom of the sea, gradually forming a demon. The demon itself gained a heart. The heart being this figure on the top, which is basically made entirely of nerves of every single person within the Leviathan. Meaning that its scream that we hear is essentially the scream of thousands or perhaps millions of people all at once. This game gets kind of eerie sometimes, I ain't gonna lie to you. The creature itself is basically meant to represent the Bible version of the Leviathan, a creature that was meant to end the world. And the Leviathan itself was getting pretty close to actually being able to get out of wrath. However, Gabriel, being the judge of hell and thus being in hell, took note of the Leviathan and struck down the heart with spears. The creature now just sits in eternal agony, screaming and thrashing in the ocean. Its once goal of wanting to end the world is no longer possible since, well, the world ended. Next up are mannequins. I've already mentioned them, but maybe you just decided to skip to the enemies. That's fine. This video is meant to address multiple things, and just you pick whatever you wanted to pick. It's fine. Mannequins are the sinners of violence, specifically and presumably in the Garden of Forking Paths only, although they are seemingly sprinkled throughout violence in other parts. Basically, once you get caught in the Garden of Forking Paths by presumably other demons or other mannequins, you have all of your joints ripped apart. All of your joints are then shoved into a mannequin shell, and your consciousness now enters the mannequin. And you can feel the pain of basically having your joints disfigured and ripped apart, all while inside the mannequin. The most that you can do is weakly breathe. You can't control how you move, where you move, what you're doing. You're stuck basically being in a passenger seat while having 1,000 needles in you. And a part of mental torture I don't think anyone ever brings up is you're in the mannequin, you can't control what it does, and you just witness basically yourself as a mannequin run up to somebody, rip off their joints, and shove them into another mannequin shell. All the while, you're watching this through the mannequin's eyes and can't do anything. That has to be torturing you mentally. That has to be mental torture. Next up, the Minotaur. Created by a, as of now, unknown character, it was a gift for King Minos, the judge of hell. It was actually the first ever demon, and so a lot of people kind of assume that hell itself actually made it. Minos, being reminded of his past mistakes in his original story of Greek mythology, banished the Minotaur into the Garden of Forking Paths. The Minotaur itself, once we see it, is old. It's aging. It was literally the first ever demon ever made. Like, once hell was made and Minos was the judge, the demon was made. That's how old it is. And so now it's falling apart. It's rotting. It can barely stay alive. And it's been wandering this maze for presumably eons. It simply has one final goal before it passes away. To see the sky one last time. However, we sadly end up ruining that dream. And if you look at its death animation, it even reaches for the sky. This game's really fucking depressing. Next up are machines. What you, the player, are in this game, as a matter of fact. You play as V1, the once cancelled robot design that was meant to counter Earth movers. And here's something Hakita's mentioned, and I want to mention here too. V1 does not have a different goal than the rest of the robots. Your goal is the same as the others. Get blood. Get more fuel. That's it. You're just doing what the other robots are doing, but you're just doing it really, really fucking good. So we're going to go and start off with some of the older robots, move on to some of the more modern ones, and then just try to cram in some malicious ones at the end. Guttermen were the first ever robots invented with the blood-fueling technology, being made in World War I. Although the people that made them, which was Russia, stated that the people inside of the Guttermen were willing volunteers, they were actually prisoners of war and deserters that were sealed into the coffin and given very minimal life support. After all, if they die, their body isn't going to produce more blood. So they had to be given minimal life support in order to keep producing blood, to keep powering the Guttermen. Yeah, it wasn't pretty. Gutter tanks were built by Germany to one-up the Guttermen, having the same technology that we actually see with our rocket, which allowed them to freeze rockets in place, and judging by their radio communications, they were even able to communicate with themselves. Not like somebody talking over a radio like, hey, I'm controlling this gutter tank. No, these machines were talking with themselves. They were able to place landmines, and they were nicknamed, with some writing on their arm, Tank Fist, because their fist could basically one-shot a tank. So after this is where the timeline of where machines were invented gets a bit messy, but I'm going to try my best to just go in the order I think that they were made to one-up stuff. Mind flayers, although their original form is completely unrecognizable, were a metal device that, well, we don't know what it was meant to do, to be honest. The actual machine is only that top part. The rest is a plastic body built by them for the purpose of just having a body. This in of itself kind of shows that machines have emotions, and I guess you could say a sense of style in a way. Although every mind flayer we see in-game is female, it's stated that very rarely some of them will use a male form, although this is a rare occurrence, which is just canonically to say that Hakita isn't going to make a male version. Although there is some art made by one of the devs of what a male mind flayer could look like, and he can choke me. Sentries served as sniper robots, And in order to prevent them from being knocked around by explosives, their legs had devices in them that allowed them to basically just become one with the earth and stick their feet extremely strongly in the ground, requiring a very great force to even get them to move. And here's a fun fact for you. Those graphics in the game that are purposely old school actually canonically have a reason for existing, and the Sentry explains this. You see, in order to save on processing power while on their journey to get fuel, machines just render a simplified version of what's in front of them. That's what you see yourself, a simplified render of hell. Sentries don't simplify their render, meaning everything to them is as realistic as the real world we see ourselves. But to every other machine, it's retro looking, which, can I just state, when I found that out, my jaw literally fucking dropped, like, oh my god. Akita, why are you so good at making in-game mechanics have a lore reason for existing? Can more game devs do this, please? Drones were basically built to be security. They originally were built during New Peace and given non-lethal ammunition. However, since they had sentience and ran on blood, began to get a thirst for blood, and have now scavenged harmful ammunition, which is hell energy in-game, but like, how did they get hell energy in their system? Look at them. All I can assume is they have like a tiny metal claw that they can pull out and just put ammo in themselves. That's all I can assume. They were also given very minimal intelligence to make them easy to make, and they were cheap to make because of it, hence why we see so fucking many of the damn shits. And I think to kind of sort of hint towards their low intelligence, they make bird noises, which, I don't know, makes them sound slightly adorable and less annoying. Street cleaners were built after the war that humanity had with themselves. They were meant to purify and burn the air to get rid of the ash and destruction and rubble created by the utterly horrid war. After hell was discovered, they were repurposed and used as scouts for hell expeditions. And also, something to note about them is that they breathe. You can audibly hear them breathing, which I think just adds to that theory that blood gives everything that it fuels life. Next up is the Swords Machine, and this is, in my opinion, probably the most badass lore entry because it's just so unique the way it was written. I just really like sword machines, okay? I think they're cool. I really like the blue sword machine. I think the blue sword machine look nice. Basically, this machine's original form, we don't know what it looks like because it's beyond recognizable from what it originally was. But basically, it has built itself out of scrap, and it just collects scrap wherever it sees it. Because of this, it's also one of the few machines to have a voice, being that when you punch the shit out of it. And also, just like some other machines, I forgot to mention this with the Mind Flayer because it only happens on violence, but the Sword Machine can get enraged. Once again, hinting about how machines, have emotion. Once again, adding to that theory that blood just gives anything it fuels emotion and personality and life. Sword machines have a giant-ass sword, if you couldn't tell by the name, and are also always equipped with a shotgun. And a fun fact for why so many of them canonically exist. So many machines looked at the Sword Machine's design and said, that's badass. I want to be like that. And so they literally copied the appearance of the Sword Machine bit by bit, meaning with the exception of the first one, which Akita himself has confirmed is the OG Sword Machine, every Sword Machine we see is a copycat that really liked the OG's appearance. That is just fucking... I don't know how to describe that. I just fucking love that. Also, a fun fact, if you didn't know, their legs are actually sentry legs, because sentry legs are very highly valued by machines like sword machines that build themselves out of scrap. Earth movers. Earth movers were built during the final part of the war and basically ended the war with how powerful they are. They were equipped with a shield generator that was both part flesh, part metal, hinting towards flesh and blood running shit, and basically they could level cities in seconds. And because of the shield generator powered by their flesh and metal brain, Earth movers couldn't be destroyed by another Earth mover. V1 was built to be a robot that could sneak in, deactivate the shield, and thus the Earth mover could be destroyed. But since Earth movers destroyed so much of Earth with just their sheer power, the war ended. Because humans realized, we're fighting over destroyed Earth now. We should probably end this war. And due to how much destruction they caused, and because of their size, they were powered by solar energy. Because they were powered by solar energy and they destroyed the Earth, the sun was blocked out by all the smoke and ash. Meaning that their solar energy was cut off. And so they all slowly began to die out due to a lack of sunlight. Bro, I'm starting to wonder if, New Peace was like barely even functional. I'm not even gonna lie to you. Speaking of New Peace, V2 was an attempt at essentially making a, by all means, police officer robot. They were meant to enforce peace and make sure nobody would ever do anything bad, but New Peace was going so well, they didn't need to make it. People were getting along with each other because, I mean, with how bad the war was, why would they start another? So just like his older brother, V2 was scrapped. Now, I'm going to briefly mention this. Angels, there's only one angel enemy, technically 2 angel bosses, although one, since it's kind of the same character, just different. I'll explain it later. Angels, we have one enemy, virtues, and they are literally our only insight into what heaven functions like. The only other thing we really know about heaven was from a dev stream where Hikita explained how angel pronouns worked, which if you're curious, basically the closer to God you are, the more you resemble a man, and so you gain he, him pronouns. But if you're a lower angel, since you're an abstract shape, you have they, them pronouns. I can already hear a redneck ready to dislike the video just because I said the word pronoun. But anyway, virtues are pretty much the lowest rank of angel. They were worthy enough to go to heaven, but weren't very creative and kind and virtuous. And so, their, I guess you could say, role, I don't want to say punishment, because they're angels, their job is to be hell wardens and enforce the rules of hell. They're basically meant to enforce the rules of a living organism that they can't control. Yeah, good job, heaven. Given the power to just blast sinners if they don't do their sins properly, and also have, strangely enough, no eyes. Now, normally, according to their entries, abstract angels do have eyes, but for some reason the hell wardens don't. Similar to how Husks have no eyes. And it's theorized by the Terminal, yeah, the Terminal theorizes this, that maybe being in hell has some connection with no eyesight. I don't know, Terminal, I'm gonna disagree with you, Dick. And with their lore, they're probably gonna be the only angel-based enemy we ever fight, because they're hell wardens. That's their job, is to be in hell. So, I doubt we'll ever see, like, a seraphim or something. Next up is Other. Now, I'm only mentioning this because there's 3, yeah, I'm counting something wicked, I'll explain it in a second. 3 enemies here, and 2 of them are pretty much the same category, so I'm just gonna explain it. In order to contain Prime Souls, because of their sheer power, because if you haven't played the game, there's a reason you gotta get a P rank, perfect rank, and there's a reason why Prime starts with P, aka Baby Talk. They're the hardest bosses in the fucking game because they're so powerful. So in order to contain such powerful souls, Heaven decided to create flesh prisons, which are powered by both holy and hell energy, which is why if you notice, some of the attacks involve the blast that we see of virtues, and others involve hell energy projectiles. Although they look like living organisms, they're more or less just a machine made of skin and bone. They only are really reacting to stimuli, which would be us attacking. There are 2 that we see, the flesh prison and the flesh panopticon. The flesh prison is used to store Minos' soul. Due to Sisyphus' soul being a lot stronger, a upgraded version was made called the Flesh Panopticon. Also, I lied when I said there was 3, there's actually 4. There's another other enemy called puppets. Only seen in violence, they are presumably, judging by some evidence that we see, the remains of sinners who we have already killed being resurrected into these meat flesh puppet things. They themselves are used to fuel the blood trees. They don't have a terminal entry, and I doubt we'll ever get one. But out of all the enemies in the game, they're pretty much the hardest to explain because, well, violence is new, the game isn't finished, and we don't really know what their purpose of existence is. The only other theory I can think of is that they are the souls within the tree asking for food. And so us killing them is fueling the tree, and I guess putting them out of their misery? But I think the idea that all the Husks that we've killed are reborn here is this, I think is a lot creepier, and that's my headcanon as of now. Next up is something wicked, and I'm only listing it for one specific reason. It has an entry in the terminal. It is found in an area located to the mouth of hell, aka the entrance of hell. And because of how strong and powerful it is, no one knows a lot about it. And so here's kind of my theory. I think that something wicked is a guardian of hell created by the angels or God, or maybe even hell itself, to prevent people from entering hell itself. It's meant to be a gate guardian of sorts for hell. And due to it being so powerful and no one really being able to talk to it, no one knows what it is. We're almost done with the enemies, okay? We're almost done. Prime souls, as I mentioned earlier, or if you skip to here, are what happens when a soul is so powerful that if the husk is killed, the soul can just live on its own. The two examples we've seen of this is Minos and Sisyphus. And I'm gonna be honest, I've already explained their stories. So just, like, fuck off if you didn't pay attention. Not my fault you don't read the lore books. But as we can see, they all have one key feature that kind of defines something about them. A popular theory for why Minos has no face is because that's where he was struck down by Gabriel, thus ruining his face and leaving his soul with no face. Sisyphus was beheaded, so where his head was is now a giant light with the remains and remnants of facial features. And as the fight goes on, the remnants of a beard. The two of them are powerful, and there's a third one which we have not met, which Sisyphus still whoops my ass. I am scared for what the third one is. And also, to yell at one of my friends, I doubt it's gonna be Jesus Prime, okay? The only real option that really fits with the other two is Tantalus Prime, okay? If you are my friend watching this, you know who you are. Shut the fuck up about Jesus Prime. So, okay. That is all of the enemies. Now, let's move on to the weaponry, and then after that, I'll talk about the events of the game, and then finally wrap up this video. So, if the mere existence of the machines wasn't already obvious enough, the world of ULTRAKILL is much more highly advanced than our own. Now, at first, they used ammunition, but of course it ran out, costed resources to make, and you had to reload every time your clip was empty. So they went ahead and made weapons that ran on electricity, and even one that ran on heat, but sadly heat weapons never got very popular. Now for this, we're going to go ahead and go in the order of the way, in the order you pick up the weapons. So we'll start with the pistol, go to the shotgun, nail gun, rail cannon, rocket launcher. The pistol was built during the final war. It was designed to be both medium and long range. Now this weapon technically does have ammunition, but the way it works is you can just fill it with little pieces of scrap and it will shoot it so fast that it is basically a bullet. Because of this, soldiers could just fill tiny pieces of scrap into the gun and it could take weeks of non-stop firing before it was finally out of ammo. The battery in the back helped to propel the ammunition. And in order to get ammunition for this gun, a lot of soldiers would often take a knife and scrape off little metal flakes of their gun, making the gun over time look very, very weird. And in the world of ULTRAKILL, it is basically considered honorable or respectful when a person has been shaving metal off their gun because it means that either 1, you're good with a pistol, or 2, it's reliable. The shotgun is an experimental weapon using heat in order to power its energy. Basically, there's heat cores inside the gun, and in order to prevent it from obviously exploding, you need to vent out the heat. This is why when you use the core eject, you see V1 flip the gun open before flipping it back. The heat itself serves as projectiles, and for some reason, V1 has the ability to punch heat and make it explode. Just don't ask, okay? I mean, I don't know how V1 has infinite coins either. This type of weapon, using heat energy, did not catch on due to it being a bit too unpredictable and dangerous to use. The nail gun is, by all means, a just bunch of scrap thrown together. It's a mix of an old bullet gun and an industrial nail gun made by machines that were originally built for construction. Due to, however, bullets basically being abandoned and every other machine using a gun that either used heat or energy, it never caught on. And also, since this weapon is by all means basically built out of duct tape and nails, it also overheats extremely easily. The rail cannon once canonically served as essentially a portable generator, and the rail cannon is by all means one of the first real uses of electricity to help them in the war. However, similar to say the nail gun, after humanity passed away and machines needed weapons to fight for blood, the machines decided to repurpose this weapon into a weapon, basically. The machines went ahead and made this generator now serve as a gun by making it shoot a large burst of energy, but due to this, it took the generator a long time to recharge all of its energy. Next up is the rocket launcher, and this one has the most lore to it. Like, seriously, the amount of lore on the rocket launcher is just fucking... Originally, the rocket launcher once served its purpose to help dig trenches, destroy obstacles, and resupply explosives. It shoots explosives. What? If you shoot a grenade at Mach 1 out of that thing, the grenade will explode. Wait, what do you mean resupply? But eventually humanity decided to try to make the explosives within the rocket have a chemical reaction that would cause an explosion. However, this chemical reaction that they were working on would often malfunction and kill the people working on it. Although we don't really know how, presumably one of the people working on it was a ferryman. and the ferryman decided to go ahead and try building or finishing the rocket launcher in his ferry. Another possible explanation, since it says machines were the ones that made the explosives work, is that the ferryman took it from machines? I don't know. But anyway, machines somehow at some point went ahead and decided that this chemical reaction is dumb. So what if we go ahead and make it to where if I shoot the rocket and it hits the person enough to where they bleed, the blood making contact with the rocket will enable a chemical reaction and make the rocket explode. So in basic terms, machines made it to where blood makes the chemical reaction and the rockets kick in and then the rockets explode. This in of itself is why you can't just shoot the ground and kill the enemies, because there's no chemical reaction, you're just shooting metal really fast. Okay, now you're probably wondering, what about the alternate revolver? What about the saw blade launcher? Well, I can kind of explain the alternate revolver. I don't know how the hell to explain the saw blade launcher. It's hinted in the data for the revolver that humans would use bigger and larger batteries to shoot harder, but unfortunately their gun would take a longer time to recharge. This in of itself is probably what the alternate revolver is, a version with a much more powerful battery but a longer recharge. The saw gun is a bit more confusing, seeing as we find it in Sisyphus Prime's room where he's like mural and corpses. I assume he might have wielded this weapon at some point, but also with how big he is, there's no way he could have used it. So if anything, I assume it was a weapon used by an insurrectionist and they placed it there in a way to kind of mourn Sisyphus. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but if you skip to here, that's fine. But you're probably wondering, how does the coin gun work? How does the rocket launcher get upgraded to shoot cannonballs? Well, the terminals have the ability to turn data into physical objects. If you skip to here, I'm sorry, I'm not going to elaborate. Just they can turn data into physical objects, alright? And by using that process, they're able to upgrade your weapons, and thus allows you to shoot coins, cannonballs, shoot a screwdriver, use the overheat on the nail gun. That, I figure, is canonically how you have these upgrades. Alright. So now that we've covered the weapons, let's go ahead and talk about the actual events that occur within ULTRAKILL. Now, I'm going to keep it very brief when talking about V1, because Hikita has basically explained the story is less about V1 and more about Gabriel. We just witness it through V1. So with V1 segments, I'm going to just be real quick breezing through them, and then with Gabriel, I'm going to actually go into depth. So firstly, one quick thing before the game's events is that Gabriel is the judge of hell. He now dictates your soul if you enter hell and what layer you go to. Since Minos is dead and his corpse is being revived by worms, Gabriel now has to watch over and pretty much now resides in hell because of his job. Although, ironically enough, it's not much of a job because humanity is extinct. And also, judging by his dialogue, it can be assumed that possibly other machines have been able to get to Gabriel before we got to him in his first boss fight. Although, maybe he's just taunting us for the sake of taunting. He is a pretty cocky guy at the start. So with V1, he enters into hell by accessing the tunnels in Prelude and acquiring a pistol. Going through the gates, he manages to enter hell. Travels through Limbo, and then he encounters V2. V2 himself is, just like V1, looking for blood. And although V2 was built to be more durable, V1 is more skilled and faster. Unless you're Germa.
It's just, I get exhausted. I can't, my brain goes like, alright man, that's enough. There's no humans are supposed to be doing this. You know what fucking humans are supposed to be doing? Humans are supposed to be fucking picking up like a wheelbarrow full of like logs and just like slowly walking with it, and delivering those logs to the community. And then like those logs are used to build houses. And then there's also like a baker and like a butcher, and no, humans aren't supposed to be doing what we're doing right now. Humans aren't supposed to be doing this. Like, we're supposed to be like, oh, howdy, how are you? Good to see you. We're not supposed to be like...
V1 makes his way into Lust, and then makes the corpse of King Minos even more of a corpse. After this, he makes his way into Gluttony, the lair in which Gabriel resides, and I guess is now the lair you go to when you first enter Hell. I mean, with Lust, it made sense, because, you know, that's the first layer of Hell proper. I don't know why Gabriel's in Gluttony, I'm gonna be honest with you. The only other thing I could think of is that he's just roaming the entirety of Hell looking for new sinners, and he catches us getting close to the entrance of Greed, and he's like, wait, I see a being who's alive. It's a machine, I'm going to go kill it. But if he knows where everyone is, then why wouldn't he have killed us? I don't know, this is like the one thing that irks me with the plot. As V1 goes through Gluttony, Gabriel speaks to him.
Machine, turn back now. The layers of this palace are not for your kind. Turn back, or you will be crossing the will of God. Your choice is made. As the righteous hand of the Father, I shall rend you apart, and you will become inanimate once more. Behold, the power of an angel! What? How can this be? Bested by this thing? You insignificant fuck! This is not over! May your woes be many and your days few.
After defeating Gabriel, Gabriel is then sent to the Holy Council. The Holy Council is absolutely angered and disgusted at the fact he even lost to a mere object in their eyes. In their eyes, he basically lost a fight with a cockroach. In order to punish him for what is in their eyes treachery, they removed his connection to the Father's light. This, I presume, means he is not able to be as strong and as powerful. That's what I assume, but anyway, without the Father's light, he'll die in 24 hours. They tell him that he has those 24 hours to reprove his loyalness, to prove that he is worthy of being the Archangel that he is. Meanwhile, with V1, they go through Greed, encounter V2 once again, and have another fight with him, and V2 is mega fucking dead by the end. Like, literally, there is nothing left of him but blood. Hakita has pointed this out. Why does everybody keep acting like he's gonna come back? He's fucking dead! V1 then goes ahead and goes through Wrath, acquires a rocket launcher, and defeats the Leviathan. He then reaches Heresy, and in Heresy, we meet Gabriel once again. He states that he knows where we are, and to come find him. So we do exactly that and go to find him. And there he gives us, honestly, one of my favorite speeches in the game.
Limbo, lust, all gone, with gluttony soon to follow. Your kind know nothing but hunger, purged all life on the upper layers, and yet they remain unsatiated. As to you, you've taken everything from the machine, and now all that remains is perfect hatred. Machine, I will cut you down, break you apart, splay the gore of your profane form across the stars. I will grind you down until the very sparks cry for mercy. My hands shall relish ending you here and now. Twice! I've only known the taste of victory, but this taste is this my blood? I've never known such relief. I need some time to think. We will meet again, machine. May your woes be many, and your days few.
Gabriel has now lost to the machine twice. But there's something to note in the fight that you maybe didn't catch. He starts angry, but then gets calm. And even though I killed him very quick in the gameplay, I apologize. His lines, he seems to chuckle at the end of every single one and sounds almost relaxed.
Nothing but scrap! I'll show you divine justice! Is this what I lost to? I'll show you true splendor! Come get some blood! What is this feeling?
What happened? Then Gabriel realized this is the first time he's had a challenge. He enjoyed the fact that he was able to have somebody worthy of his power. He wasn't just able to annihilate us like every other machine, like every other husk or demon. We were a genuine challenge for him. We gave him something to fight for. And that's why he sounds happier in the second stage of the final fight, because he realizes that he's actually struggling, and he enjoys the feeling of struggling. Because for all his life, probably, he's just been able to just kill somebody real quick, since he's, an archangel. But upon leaving, he goes to the moon. Now, I know that's weird, let me explain. So, first off, this is a reference to Dante's Divine Comedy. The whole game is basically based off his interpretation of hell, and this is based on Dante's interpretation of heaven, where the first layer of heaven is on the moon. Remember, this was written in the 1800s. They didn't even know we'd ever go there. And I like to think in ULTRAKILL, because humanity was so obsessed with war, after all, canonically, the war basically started in World War I, we just never went to the moon. So I'd like to think that's why humanity doesn't know that the first layer of heaven is on the moon. They were so busy with war, they never went there. But anyway, he sits and starts a fire and questions the council and God. And this is, in my opinion, a very great, I'll get into it more in the analysis, but Gabriel's view on heaven summarizes mine greatly. He thinks about the Father's original rules. He thinks about what the Father wanted to do in the first place, and looks at the council. The council is not doing what the Father wanted. They're chasing an ember of a fire that's long gone. There's no God left to try to follow. Their attempt at trying to catch this fire has just twisted and warped what they wanted to do to heaven. They are, by all means, changing what the Father's goals and dreams were. They aren't really following what God wanted to do anymore. They're kind of just doing what they want to do. And much like God himself, Gabriel questions, why was hell ever even made? In the end, who did it benefit? Hell? It's an organism, and apparently it feels hunger, so it got more food, but you're feeding a basically demon by all means. You could be sending these people to heaven to live eternal paradise. He looks at what God did like a puzzle, and realizes that this puzzle never fit together in the first place. And the council's still trying to keep it going. And Gabriel decides things need to change. So, he goes into the council's house and proceeds to massacre every single one of them. A dying council member tries to defend himself. He states that what Gabriel is doing is heresy, it's treachery, it's murder. He states that the people of heaven are on their side, but Gabriel responds with that they're only on the council's side because there's no God to follow. They're following the council out of a fear and desperation that God is dead. That's the only reason they even follow the council in the first place, and the reason the council was even formed. And while in this, Gabriel delivers a line that I think really fits the tone of the game. We all bleed the same blood. Every husk, angel, prime soul, demon, even machine is ran on blood. Everything by a physical standpoint is basically just a machine running on blood. If God made everything, then what makes certain parts of it special? What makes a demon different from an angel? What makes a pig different from a human? We all run on blood, we're all living beings. The council member, in one last attempt to try to convince Gabriel not to kill him, says that if he kills him, the final council member still alive, Gabriel can never get his connection to the Father's light back, and he'll die. Gabriel says, I know, and then kills the holy council member. Gabriel then, with the beheaded head of the council member, shows it to heaven, showing that the council is gone, and a message that rang out through the cosmos was heard. Gabriel then left heaven for the very last time, and that's pretty much where the story ends. Every other piece of lore that we've learned in Violence more or less only taught us stuff that happened before the events of ULTRAKILL. We don't really know what's going to happen next. But I do know whatever is, Hikita is definitely going to surprise the shit out of me. And now that we've covered the story, the lore, even the weapons, I want to do a small analysis on just why I love the lore of this game. Hikita in the dev stream, the second dev stream, pointed out that ULTRAKILL's lore was more or less his way of kind of trying to figure out if God was real, why would he make hell? And trying to also metaphorically show that the message of the Bible has been, throughout the years, severely changed. I mean, the Bible is literally thousands of years old. And if you know anything about stories, they change from ear to ear. So whatever the original Bible was is definitely no longer what it is now. For example, and this is a part that personally affects me, is a part of the Bible that mentions how boy shall not touch man, or man shall not touch boy, basically saying pedophilia is bad. Well, nowadays it's been changed to man shall not touch man. And as a bi guy, you know, then you get weird looks from Christian people. But anyway, political part aside, Hikita's goal and what his message is with the game is something I honestly fully just love. And is a great argument, in my opinion, when it comes to some negative points about religion. I don't think, even though I know many of my series have negative themes on religion, I don't think that being a Christian is bad. I just think that following the Bible's rules is bad, if that makes sense. I think if you believe in God, that's fine. Believe in God all you want. I think that the Bible truly does contain good stories about things you should do, about how you should be nice to people, about how you should be kind, and if you're a Christian, it teaches you how you should be looking to God and praying to Him. But I kind of view the Bible as a story, and simply nothing but that. A story with good lessons and telling you that if you believe in God personally, then God will thank you and let you into heaven. But trying to follow a book that has been changed throughout the thousands of years it's been around is a bit dumb. You're basically using a manual for an old car, is the best way to describe it. It's like having a manual for an old car, but you have a 2020 car. You're following a book that's very much out of date and is nowhere near what you need. In my opinion, following the Bible just is weird to me because you're following, by all means, an out-of-date belief. This was written thousands of years ago. Humanity's changed. I mean, for fuck's sake, back then, we literally enslaved people over the color of their skin. We have very much matured, for the most part. But overall, not only do I think its kind of sort of critique on religion is very good and something I very much agree with and question myself when it comes to religion, but just in general, its story is great. Seeing Gabriel truly understand the flaws of hell and the council, seeing Gabriel finally break and decide to kill the council in order to show a message to heaven is just amazing storytelling. It may have amazing gameplay, a killer soundtrack, and amazing voice acting, but its story to me is gotta be the best part. While I love its gameplay, I'd argue its story is even better. ULTRAKILL's lore is, by all means, a story about chasing ghosts. The Council chasing God. The machines chasing fuel. The Husks chasing freedom. And the angels chasing rules. God created hell, and by all means, that was his biggest mistake ever. And so he fled and is either dead or is hiding out of just pure guilt. The Council have tried chasing his rules and doing what he did, but they can't do it. They're not gods. They're just really high-rank angels. They can't do what God did. And so because of that, what was once God's rules have been bent and twisted by the Council. The machines are chasing fuel that will inevitably run out. They're going to kill everything in hell. Gabriel has stated that the first 3 layers are already empty, drained dry of all the life on there. Machines are going to inevitably kill everything in hell. The Husks are chasing freedom, but they know they can never escape. You can't escape lust. You cannot escape limbo. You cannot escape violence. You cannot escape hell. And if what we believe with the puppets is true, not even death will let you escape. They chase death, and death will run from them. And finally, the angels are only following the Council out of just fear and desperation. God is gone. There's no God to follow or pray to anymore. And that's not even counting the story of humans in this thing. The things that they've done, the war that they went through, and the fact that they basically fucked over Earth. Their war didn't end with a gunshot, or a bang, or a nuke. it ended with the Earth movers slowly dying, and then humanity realizing slowly what they've done. It only took 200 years. ULTRAKILL, to me, while it's an amazing FPS, I personally would argue its story is truly the best part of it.